Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 2, Episode 14. It's called Die Hand Die Verletzt. I'm assuming that that's supposed to be German, and that's why I said Die instead of die. But, spoilers for the episode. This is an interesting one, because it's very different, I felt. And I don't mean that in a bad way. If anything, I would say I mostly had fun with this. I felt like it was playing with some slightly different things. We're basically dealing with a witch. We've got we got devil worshippers, we got a cult, but the main villains actually are just a straight up kind of like black magic witch is kind of what it felt like by the end. But there's maybe a few wrinkles that that I had along the way. Some things that I'll maybe critique a little bit, but for the most part, I like how it ended. I like just how different some of the scenes felt. It kind of felt like someone who grew up watching the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is in some ways kind of the closest relative in a sense to this show. And then I watched that more or less as it was airing. I started a little bit late, but I was thinking a little bit about a very early episode of Buffy as I was watching this about a witch in a high school, because this is also primarily set around the high school, and how this is probably a much more effective episode than that episode in Buffy is, because this is maybe able to go a little bit darker, a little bit more in the horror sort of style. Obviously, X-Files, I would say in general, is just aimed at a slightly older audience than Buffy. Not by an extreme amount, but certainly Buffy's supposed to appeal to teens and sort of young adults, whereas X-Files, I'd say, is aiming a little older, although the actual difference in terms of who's watching them, I don't think is actually that great, but definitely there is a bit of a difference. I will say, this isn't so much a critique as just kind of an observation, is that I feel like there's been a lot of episodes recently that have dealt with, at least I mean, admittedly in this episode it turns out to possibly have not happened, but there's been a lot of episodes recently that have dealt with sexual assault in some way. Either some characters went through it in the episode, or it's happened in the past, via a serial killer who was doing that, or whatever. And in this episode has a pretty gut-wrenching scene where a teenage girl describes repressed memories that are coming back to her of really horrific things that happened to her. And I was actually sitting in a fair bit of shock at how much this scene went in terms of like what she was describing. Like she really starts talking about being taken out to a backseat of a car and being touched and things like that, and then talks about others coming to do things to her. And some of it's a little bit vague, and the vagueness almost adds to how dark it sounds, because your mind kind of jumps to some of the worst possible things that it could be. By the end, it turns out that that seems to have not been the case, which honestly might be one of the little critiques I'd have, is that for how far that scene went, where this teen girl just pours her heart out, crying her eyes to Mulder and Scully about these horrific things that she's remembering from her childhood, and that her little sister was murdered by her stepdad, and her stepdad had did all these awful things to her. But by the way, the stepdad's Bulldog from Frasier, which is messing with my mind as I was watching this as well. The fact that later on the explanation for that, in the sense that it didn't really happen, is that, oh, they did repress her memories because she was used in some light satanic rituals, but the stepdad just theorizes that these memories, because he's downright like horrified that she thinks this about him, is just like but the memories coming back is kind of mixed in with something she's read or something like that, or these horrific ideas or stories she's heard in newspapers. And that felt like almost like a really unsatisfying reason. Like, I'm okay with it having not happened. If anything, I'm relieved that the horrific things she was saying had happened in her childhood had not happened. In fact, she also says at one point that she had given birth to multiple babies who were immediately killed for sacrificial reasons. And even on a biological level, I'm thinking, is that even possible for someone who, at the age she's describing herself being when this was happening, it sounds like that shouldn't be possible. And I suppose maybe we could headcanon it and say the villain is adding some of this stuff herself, that she's putting in these more horrific versions of the memories. In fact, if anything, that's maybe what's implied. But when the stepdad just kind of gives his theory, which is, oh, it's just other horrible things she's read have mixed in with the memories, and it's making this really horrific version of it, I was like, oh, that's a little, I don't know. If you're going to bring up things that are as serious and as dark as that, then I feel like I want it to be something more than just a red herring, I guess. Like, if you're going to bring up those subjects, then you best do something serious with them, I guess. Admittedly, now I'm thinking about it and maybe saying, oh, it's the villain who's putting those ideas in her head, perhaps. I mean, that's better. It's better just because it sells how evil the villain is. It sells how evil that she would put these ideas into the teenage girl's head. So, thinking about it a bit more in those terms, maybe I'm okay with it. But it's certainly when it got to that moment in the episode where the stepdad just said that, I was like, really? That's all that was? It's just her mind's got confused, and we went through that horrific telling of her childhood that she's remembering, and it's all just kind of a dead end as far as story goes. But admittedly, thinking that it might be the villain causing it, because she's certainly influencing other things as the episode goes on, it would stand to reason that maybe that's what's happening, given else what we see in the episode. So, I'll reconsider my thought in that based on when I started speaking. Sometimes when you start thinking through things, you get to like different conclusions. Maybe you come up with better reasons for things. Some of it's a little cheesy, right? For as dark as the episode is in some ways, in terms of, the scene where this girl pours her heart out about being molested as a child, there's also, some fun, cheesy stuff, and arguably maybe that those don't all fit together perfectly. But I did enjoy whenever it cut back to the witch character and she's like doing her rituals and holding out like a personal object over the flame and her eyes are going all wild. But, this might be the most in any episode of X-Files so far for lightning strikes. The lightning in this episode is going off constantly. Every time this woman's doing a ritual, there's light flashes out the window. We go to the house of the stepdad and mom of the teenage girl. There's lightning flashes as Mulder's getting into the house. Like, there's a lot of lightning flashes in this episode. And there's also a lot of mystical forces turning the lights off, so there's a lot of going around with flashlights and all that good stuff to make it creepy and more of a horror movie episode, which is fun. Like, X-Files tends to be its best, honestly, when it's doing horror movie stuff. So I enjoyed this. I enjoyed, by and large, a lot of what this episode is doing. It feels like it's having some fun with a very different concept that it's not completely really done yet. The episode opens with 4 teenagers, 2 boys, 2 girls, going out into this part of the woods where there's... Well, actually, that's not the first scene. The first scene is the faculty meeting of the 4, like, satanic worshippers, right? Led by Bulldog from Frasier. And they, as the episode goes on, like, I think we're meant to think they're the main threat, but they're not really. There's actually they're kind of like amateurs, effectively, who have only done kind of half measures. I mean, they do kind of imply at one point they have sacrificed someone, so they have crossed some extreme lines, perhaps. That said, though, when Bulldog later in the episode's confessing a lot of things to Mulder, he doesn't seem to imply that they have done anything that severe. He says they glossed over things that were too extreme or didn't do. I'm maybe wondering if the other 3 people in this little group did do something horrific without his knowledge back then, because it seems like maybe there was a sacrifice, because we find out that the teenage girl, she did have a little sister, but the little sister didn't die at 8 years old like she thought. She died at 8 weeks. So maybe the implication is that these other worshippers actually did sacrifice this baby way back. So, I mean, anyway, so it just interests them and the idea to do a little satanic prayer after their faculty meeting at the school, whatever. But yeah, the teenagers go out into the woods. Basically, the 2 guys are idiots and they're trying to impress the 2 girls by doing a satanic ritual. And they're freaked out when it actually seems to get something happens, right? Fire starts shooting up out of the ground. Something else happens first, I can't remember. But the fire is the main thing I remember. And then one of the teenage boys dies, right? And that's what brings in Mulder and Scully. The local police call him in. I actually thought this local cop was going to be a bigger character because they really made a big deal in this scene early on of him talking about how he believes that there's a lot of creepy stuff going on in the town. There's a lot of rumors of like cults and devil worshipping and stuff like that. And Mulder kind of like doesn't indulge him, even though he does turn to Scully and say, hey, I do think something weird's going on here, but I didn't want to like give him more ammunition because he's already in the deep end with his beliefs. So, but I'm more reserved. I'm Mulder. I take these things seriously. Scully kind of doesn't want to believe anything, and just as she's saying how ridiculous any of this stuff is, it starts raining toads. Honestly, this is a really fun little moment. If nothing else, Gillian Anderson's face during this scene as she's reacting to toads around her might be the most adorable moment of the show so far. The way she just has this shocked look in her face, she just kind of sort of scrunchies up and she's got the umbrella, because it's raining all right, so they're both holding umbrellas. But the way she's sort of hunched up and just sort of looking kind of scared out, like, what the hell's happening, I actually thought was adorable. I don't know if that's what the tone they were going for in that moment, but that's all I could think was how adorable she was being as she was like, holy shit, there's toads flying around me. How do I explain this? And she does explain it, and like almost the very next scene, she's like, oh, there was a tornado just like north of the state, and the toads must have been picked up in the tornado, and they've carried, and that's how they fell. That's all it is. Nothing supernatural. It's not spooky shit. It's just extreme weather, extreme fantastical weather. That's all it is. But I got a kick out of that moment. But yeah, anyway, so once they start investigating the school, and the other teenagers I thought were going to be bigger characters because the other boy tries to run away, but he ends up not being around too much, which honestly isn't a bad thing, because the one scene he does have when Mulder and Scully are talking to him, the actor's not the best. He's definitely the weak link in the episode, I felt, as far as like guest stars go. But the one teenage girl, of course, that becomes more of a prominent factor is the one that sticks out of the group. She ends up having like a breakdown when they're trying to dissect like pigs or something in the like baby pigs. And honestly, I'm genuinely curious for the Americans who watch these reviews. I want to know, because I've seen this in multiple movies and TV shows at this point, but I seriously have to ask, is this real? Do students in the US actually dissect animals in a biology class? Because that's not a thing here. It's just not a thing. I mean, to be fair, I never took biology. When it became time to choose what subjects you specialised in, I picked chemistry instead of biology. I never really did any advanced biology. So who knows? Maybe that class did have dissection and I just never saw it. But as far as I have never heard anyone in the UK talk about dissected animals. It's such an American movie and TV thing. But they whip it out in this episode like it's like a normal thing. Here's your dead animal. Get cutting away. Just imagine the vegetarians and the vegans freak it out. And not that I blame them. I wouldn't feel comfortable cutting into a dead animal either. I'm like, this is horrific. This is horrific, forcing all the kids. Like, once you have picked your field, right? Once you have decided that you want to go into, like, become a vet maybe, or become some kind of like, expert biologist in a particular field, whether that's marine biology or mammals or whatever, right? Once you've picked a field, obviously, much like becoming a doctor, at a certain point, you're going to have to study the body, and you're going to have to study dead animals. But we're not whipping out dead people for high school students. You know, you're going to medical school first, and you understand when you make that choice that you're going to have to study this kind of thing. You're opting into it. The idea of just whipping out dead animals for every kid, when a lot of them won't be able to stomach it, just feels especially cruel. So I'm genuinely curious if this is a real thing, and if it was a real thing in the 80s and 90s, is it still a real thing in the 2020s? I'm very fascinated by this. Especially since all I hear from Americans when it comes to schools is how they're all underfunded. So I'm just imagining them like buying all these dead animals for the kids to cut up. We can't give the kids textbooks, but we'll give them dead animals. Anyway, that was a weird little rant. I wasn't expected to go on that, but here we are. So yeah, I mean, Mulder and Scully aren't really finding much. Mulder is suspicious that some things are going on. The school counselor, who's one of the cult members, he seems to be like deflecting with Mulder quite quickly, and Mulder notices that. But obviously the main thing here is that the substitute teacher for the biology class is the main witch, who seemingly the rest of the cult don't know about. They don't know she exists. They don't understand why she's there. And that's why I was kind of getting the impression that over the course of the episode, that this little group were amateurs who had dabbled but didn't really know the full weight of what they were doing. Whereas this substitute teacher, this Mrs. Paddock, her name is, she is like a full-on out and right witch. And by the end of the episode, she has killed all of these cult members. She has killed anyone who could, like, you know... I think they're going with the idea that the kids at the start raised her, perhaps. That maybe, maybe I'm saying witch because she's doing a lot of witch-like things, but maybe that's an incorrect name here. Maybe she is more just a straight-up demon, and she does things via some kind of witchcraft. Or maybe she was a witch that was died a long time ago, and she's been brought back because these kids did this little ritual in the woods. But either way, the cult members, these 4 adults who are part of this cult, do not know about her, and they're questioning why things are happening later on. They don't understand. If anything, they think at one point that, oh, Satan stepped in and is helping us out because this makes something convenient for us. They don't know that she is the big bad that's behind everything. And clearly this witch lady, Mrs. Paddock, does not care about them. In fact, she's quite happy to kill all them by the end to cover any trace of her existing and why she's around. But she has like a heart in her drawer, which obviously is a cool, spooky little moment. She ultimately makes the teenage daughter kill herself. But I feel like I'm glossing over, because I already mentioned it really, but like after she has this freak out in the classroom and she goes running from like the staff room and they're trying to call her dad to come and pick her up, Mulder chases her down and tries to ask her what's going on and ask if she's remembering repressed things. I mean, that's like, honestly, out of all the episodes when Mulder gets these hunches, the one thing he gets a hunch about in this episode is the idea that some of the students are suffering from repressed memories. He sees the telltale signs of that, apparently. But sure enough, we get this big scene, and it is maybe the strongest, most emotional scene in the episode. It's not as fun, obviously, because it's just this girl pouring her heart out about these horrific things. But it's fairly well performed. I think, I'm not saying the teenage girl who's the actress is like in line for awards, but I think she's good enough and feels like a real teenager that Mulder and Scully reacting to all these things she's saying gives it a lot of weight. But they go and question her mom and stepdad after this, and obviously they're denying this. He's horrified of what's been said. Still, there's some things in his house that look like they could be cultish, and the door to the basement, and the basement was implicated as like a place where rituals were being performed. So Mulder's very curious, but the bulldog gets angry and tells him to leave. He demands that they get out. And then next time we see the teenage girl, she's trying to do a makeup for running out of class when they were doing the dissections. And this is where our Mrs. Paddock, she performs a ritual that makes her commit suicide with her scalpels that she's using for the dissection. And it feels like, okay, they're covering, or she's at least covering this up, if not the cult in general. And, I think it is open for a little bit, because when the cult are talking like, hey, as much as, because Bulldog's like, hey, did any of you have anything to do with my daughter's death? And that's the first time I think the audience knows to believe that maybe he's telling the truth when he says that he didn't do the thing she said, because he does seem to genuinely not like be happy that she's dead, and that he's like accusing the others, like, none of you better had anything to do with that. And they're all saying, no, it wasn't us. And, it wasn't. It was this other unknown teacher that none of them associate with. But it's the first time you're like, okay, maybe there's some truth to what he was saying. Maybe he's not guilty of what he was being accused of. Maybe there's something more to this. He meets his demise in a very different way, because it's after this where he actually wants to talk to Mulder and confess things, and we get him saying, yeah, we did things, and, I believe Christianity was a sham, but now I'm starting to believe that there's just as much hypocrisy in what I'm involved in, because these others were ready to just like, hey, blame your daughter, like say she killed the other boy out of jealousy or something. And he's, that sort of made him want to like not go along with them anymore. He comes to Mulder. Mulder handcuffs him in the basement when he gets a phone call, seemingly from Scully, saying she's in trouble at the school. But it's not that. In fact, the build-up to this was very good, because it makes you concerned for Scully. Because given how this witch is just like making people kill themselves, it's like, how does Scully and Mulder fight that if they're targeted? And we get a scene where after they question her, after the girl's apparent suicide, but obviously witch murder, better descriptor, there's a whole scene where, again, the lightning's flashing through the windows as she picks up Scully's pen to say, hey, she's got an item that belongs to Scully. This is dangerous. Like, she might do something to Scully. But it turns out, instead of using it to harm Scully, she's actually using it to mimic Scully's voice via phone, like the Terminator. So that Mulder is lured away from Bulldog. And I'm calling him Bulldog because that's what he is in Frasier. They just go with it. I'm not going to call him Jim Osbury. I don't care for that. He's Bulldog. Yeah, it's kind of weird seeing him play a serious role though. I'm so used to him just yelling and like, being very like animated with everything. But while Mulder's away, the snake comes out to play because Paddock's snake comes down, and they don't show too much of this because they can't. But it's very implied that this snake just swallows him whole, which obviously is a real thing that pythons can do. But obviously they can't show like this mid stages of it, so it kind of just like implies it's about to start, and then you see like the snake looking very full afterwards, which is a funny visual. When Mulder gets to the school and Scully's like, "I didn't call you. What are you talking about?" They go back to the house where he was handcuffed, and Mulder comes downstairs with her to find that Scully is. There's dogs barking outside, but I'm like so distracted right now trying to focus on my sentence. My neighbors have like 4 little noisy dogs, and I'm not saying I endorse witchcraft to kill dogs, but I'm just sometimes I wonder. Anyway, they come down and find his skeleton that's been like left behind, like the snake's finished having its meal and shot out a skeleton or coughed it up. I don't know, whatever, however a snake deals with. Yeah, I don't think snakes don't have like assholes, so yeah, probably just comes back out the mouth. So someone could correct me. I'm no expert by any means. Now, I was thinking here, this is ridiculous. There's no way a snake would be done digest, because it's not even been that long. It's like Mulder left, went straight to the school, and then presumably came straight back with Scully. Like, I don't know what the distance between this house and the school is, but I think it's even generous to say it's been 30 minutes since he left the house. You know, this is like a house that's close enough to the school that the daughter goes there, so it's maybe, what, 15, 20 minutes away at most? You would assume? It's a small town, it's not like it's a big city. Regardless, that's not really a complaint though, because almost as soon as I thought that was ridiculous and I was just going to sort of like brush over it and say it was silly, Scully points it out and says, "This is impossible. There's no way like a snake would take weeks even, to consume a full human and be done with it and like digest it completely." You know, Mulder makes a little comment about how she like has been watching Discovery Channel or whatever, but they do address it, so they're clearly saying, no, this is part of the witch supernatural stuff, which is fine. Like, okay, the supernatural stuff's involved, this is all the part of the witchy occult stuff, that's fine, you're giving me a reason, that's okay. So they go back to the school, and we get a big showdown where they're creeping about the school looking for Mrs. Paddock, because they remember she had a snake in the biology class. And throughout the episode, Scully's been like looking her up because she's like, hey, no one remembers hiring her, she just kind of showed up. But she's actually getting to the point where she's concluding that it's fine. Like there's nothing suspicious about her other than that. Obviously, just as she's like trying to say that is when, you know, all the other shit happens, so clearly not. If anything, I was actually kind of wondering if at the end of the episode, if Mulder and Scully would even know it was her. I thought like she'd disappeared without a trace, because it felt like she was going to get away with it, right? No matter what the events leading up to the ending were. My strong inclination from about, I don't know, 2/3 in or whatever, but by the time she was targeting Scully, my inclination was that she was probably going to get away with it by the end of the episode. Obviously, Mulder and Scully would be fine because we've got more show to do, but I figured that the only way to end this and make it feel like she's still creepy is to have her not be caught. Because if she gets caught by Mulder and Scully and that's just it, it's over, I think that would take away from the horror of how powerful she is, because it's like, well, yeah, but 2 FBI agents, without even knowing exactly what you were doing with your superpowers, were able to stop and arrest you. That would diminish the impact. Her getting away at the end, what she does is absolutely the right choice for the episode to keep the creep factor of like how serious she was up. Yeah, the other 3 cult members basically kidnap, like they actually grab Mulder and Scully and drag them. They sort of tie up their hands and drag them to the shower room where they're going to kill them. They put them in the showers and turn the water on so that the blood's easy to clean up, right? Because the counselor one's just going to shoot them with a shotgun. That's it. But just as this is happening, Mrs. Paddock's doing her spell again. She's got something over the flame, like we've seen throughout the episode. And just like she took control of the teenage girl earlier to commit suicide, she takes control of the guy with a shotgun, who it's implied shoots the other 2 cult members and then himself. Mulder immediately says, oh, it was Paddock. It must have been Paddock. Like, he looked like he was being taken over. Like, someone was controlling him. So he does jump to like the right conclusion there as well, I guess. But because I was wondering if it wouldn't be definitive to them, like they'd have to just like sort of like wonder, and that might have even been a little bit better. Like, oh, we don't even know if it was her. Obviously, she makes it clear it was her, right? Because the final scene of the episode is them rushing back to the classroom, and she's nowhere to be found. She's gone. But there's just a message on the board that says, goodbye, it's been a pleasure working with you, or something to that effect. This idea that like Mulder and Scully's involvement helped her take out everyone that would have been able to like know who she was or where she was from or whatever. And I will say I really like the final shot of this episode. It's a oneer that sort of pulls back from them looking at the board. The classroom lights come back on. You know, whatever mysterious force was keeping the power off is left, so that the lights come back on. And the camera pulls back from Mulder and Scully and goes out the classroom door, and then goes around the windows that are alongside the classroom. So the final shot is like through the window, but it's not like just like one window. It goes down a whole row of windows and ends on a. It's quite a long little shot. And I quite like that. I thought that added a bit of atmosphere. This idea this force could still be watching them, like somehow she's still keeping an eye on them. It just added a bit, again, a bit more horror movie creep vibes to the proceedings. So, yeah, it's a fun episode for the most part. It gets ultra serious with the teenage girl stuff, and I would maybe argue that like the rest of the episode doesn't feel like it's serious enough to feel like it warranted going that dark with that conversation. I guess that's probably my biggest like critique I'd say. That said, though, on its own, it was a really well done scene, and I enjoyed the scene for how it tackled the material. But it is interesting that this show now, I think like 3 or 4 episodes out of the last 5 or 6 at this point have had something to do with sexual assault, either happening in the episode or being referenced. I mean, just going back here, the last episode was a serial killer who, it was kind of sexual. He was kidnapping women and whatnot, although I don't know if he was actively assaulting them in that way. But before that, did Aubrey have something like that? Yeah, the killer from the past, he was assaulting women, and he had a whole thing where he was being creepy with Scully in that episode. Obviously, the one in the mental hospital started with a rape. Like, it feels like we've had a few of these recently where this has been coming up. Which, it's not really even a complaint. It's just kind of weird that they're all bundled so close together when I don't feel like it's been brought up that much before then. So, either way, worth mentioning, just an observation there. Yeah, it's a fun episode. The direction's kind of playful at times. Like I say, that final shot, every time the lightning strikes. Like, the first time it happened, I'm like, oh, that's a bit cheesy. But the second time it happened, I'm like, yeah, that's a bit cheesy. But I was kind of into it at that point. Like, it kind of put me in the mood for a bit of cheesy. So, you know, I had a fun time with this episode. It's pretty solid. There's some good moments with Mulder and Scully. It felt like even Mulder was a little bit in a new, like a little bit out of his depth, because this is dealing with like a topic that he's not as like obsessed with, even though he's clearly interested, but he's not as obsessed with it. I didn't mention the scene where like on the internet, like Scully discovered that the local paper had basically just taken like a story about a Jewish person from Nazi Germany, but it just swapped in words. So it's the idea being that you're just fitting in whoever you want the people to like mistrust or prejudice against in your time. Again, that was a really interesting little bit for her, like on its own, but I don't know if I felt like it really added much to the episode as a whole. I felt like it developed on as the episode continued. But on its own, it was a nice little scene and idea for her to like notice that. But yeah, anyway, that's my thoughts on the episode. Next time on X-Files, we've got an episode called Fresh Bones. Here's a description on IMDb. The death of a Marine who allegedly committed suicide unearths a disturbing truth at a Haitian refugee camp. Okay, could be getting into some serious topics here as well again, but we'll see. Yeah, all right. So, thank you very much for joining me, everyone. You can, of course, support all the content and help keep it coming by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and subbing over there for however much you would like per month, or YouTube membership's another way to do it, of course. But any and all ways that anyone can support the content, it does help. I wouldn't be able to do this as at the level I do, as frequently as I do, without the funding via Patreon and YouTube memberships and things like that. So Thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Obviously, hit the like button, subscribe. If you've somehow found this episode first, go back and check out the previous season and a half of reviews. Check out the other shows that I've reviewed. Go check out the movie channel with Male Fuzz Movies, where we do movie podcasts. There's even a sci-fi movie podcast over there called the Atomic Cinema Experiment with over 200 episodes talking about different sci-fi movies. So thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?